Hey y'all, welcome to the Southern Appalachian Herbal Podcast. I'm Judson Carroll and I'm an herbalist. I'm also a wild crafter, a gardener, and herb grower. I'm coming to you from high atop the beautiful Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, just a stone's throw from the Tennessee line, overlooking the Pisgah National Forest. Absolutely surrounded by the bounty of God's green earth. I spent most of my life wandering these mountains and learning about plants from the old timers and all sorts of characters. On this show, we'll talk about herbs and how to use them, how to find them, how to grow them, how to make preparations. We'll talk about a lot of things. We can also talk about permaculture, homesteading, foraging, and living off the land. Most anything, really. You can email me at southernappalachianherbs@gmail.com if you have a question or a comment. You can also contact me through the Grow Network, where I'm a regular contributor and a moderator for the forums. And my blog is, of course, southernappalachianherbs@blogspot.com. All right, y'all. I'm going to sit my guitar down and let's talk about herbs. Hey, y'all. Welcome to the show. First of all, I have got some big news for everybody. You know, I never imagined this thing would grow so quickly and so big. When I started doing my blog back in September of last year, I think that first month I got 15 or 20 readers. That was pretty good. By month two, I was getting like about 150. Well, just put this in perspective. On For the month of December, 876 people, I believe. Well, I checked it on the 15th. As of the 15th, over 1,500 people had already come to my blog this month, reading my articles. The podcast is growing by about 20% or more week to week. We actually grew by well over 30% from week before last to last week's show. I am literally communicating with hundreds of people a week now about herbs. It's really something. I mean, I didn't see this coming, and I enjoy it. But one thing that people started asking me from the beginning, and it's probably the most common question I get asked, is how should someone learn about herbs? So I usually send them a bunch of resources, some schools and some books and some online classes and all that. But what really shocked me, and this happened really early on, is people started saying, no, we want to come learn from you. Now, I am a private person, a very quiet life in the woods, and I am not set up for that. But maybe one day, a lot of people are urging me to do on-site training and plant walks and maybe week or even month or summer-long intensive herbal training courses. It's intimidating. It's nothing I've ever done before, but I just might do it. Um, I think the reason is people just like my perspective. I mean, I come at herbs from a different perspective than most herbalists and herb teachers. Very, I don't know if you want to say common sense, but, just very practical. And I think people feel like they know me and they trust me through the show. I do have, a background of over 20 years learning about and using herbs. A long folk tradition, lots of classes and certificates, tons of books. The knowledge is there, and I really should be sharing it. The more I think about it, the more it seems like that's probably kind of my mission in life. And I'll get to that a little bit more later. But one thing I can do right now is I'm going to offer free herb classes to everybody, all y'all, as we say around here. I am going to begin as of today, and this should be live when the podcast is announced tomorrow. 10 to 15 minute weekly classes on the new video platform Rumble. I've checked them all out. I hate YouTube. I really don't like any Google product, but I'm kind of stuck with a few of them right now. Rumble is like YouTube, but seems to be more honest, more straightforward, and less censored. Hopefully, who knows the way things are going, it will remain that way, and these classes will be archived on there for years. They can be ongoing. And it's going to start at the very most basic level. I mean, I'm going to start out teaching how to make teas and tinctures. I'm going to talk about how what you might consider to treat your own or your family's colds, coughs, sprains, cuts, arthritis, sleeplessness, very basic stuff. We're going to go through herbs like one at a time, probably. And I may even get into growing herbs or wildcrafting a little bit. But this is going to be a lot of fun. And I'm going to put the link in the show notes, and I will announce it on the blog and on the Grow Network and the various forums I participate in. And you can find me on Rumble. It's rumble.com, and it's just Judson Carroll. And again, the blog is Southern Appalachian Herbs, .blogspot.com. The podcast, of course, is on Spreaker and just about every platform now, but it's Southern Appalachian Herbs. So share it with your friends. That's the one thing about Rumble. I say they're more honest. Instead of using your information to profit on, they actually just show you a tiny little ad at the beginning of each video, and that's how they make their money. And they're upfront about it, as opposed to like Facebook and the rest of them that are just taking your information and profiting off of you. So I like them. I hope you do too, and I hope they stick around if I have to go to YouTube. So anyway, let's get on to today's show, and I want to talk about herbal teas. Now, herbal teas are something that get kind of short shrift in today's herbal teachings and books, and usually when they are written about, it's usually one of those books kind of by women, for women, like start off soaking in a hot bath with rose petals and then put on your fuzzy slippers and pour a relaxing cup of herbal tea and sit down and, stroke your cat and journal about your feelings. Yeah, I'm not going to do that. I'm sure you're all shocked. In the immortal words of Frank Sinatra, I don't swing that way, baby. Well, I'm going to talk about herbal teas as legitimate herbal medicine. Now, it is true when you think about an herb shop or an herbalist with his or her apothecary, um, you don't normally think of teas. I mean, you're probably going to think about jars on a shelf and bags of like whole roots or cut and sifted dried herbs, tinctures, powders, maybe tablets. Teas definitely have the connotation of kitchen medicine, home remedies. And that's a really good thing. In fact, I think probably the main reason German folk medicine and, well, really the herbalism itself has remained so popular in Germany and many of the Germanic speaking countries is that Father Nape, and yes, my German friends finally told me how to pronounce his name, Nape, was adamant that most of his remedies could be taken as teas and should be taken as teas. Um, he took that, by that point, almost 2,000-year-old, 1,500-year-old of monastic medicine that really developed in Central Europe, especially after the fall of the Roman Empire. But um, they would had their herb gardens and their monastic hospitals well before then. He took all that herbal medicine and knowledge that had been passed down from the Greeks and the Romans and the Egyptians and the Hebrews and all those cultures and refined and enhanced in the monasteries for, like I said, well over 1,500 years. And he distilled it into a practical, usable, inexpensive system of medicine for common people. In fact, I'm just going to read from just a brief passage from his book, My Water Cure, and I have referenced this before. That was his goal. And I think it's a worthy goal. And I think it's going to become my goal as well. I think this is, I wasn't sure at first, but I think this is actually why I'm doing this. Um, he said, I willingly throw open the doors of my pharmacy and invite everyone to analyze their content. No expensive stock in trade will be found here. For most of my medicines, infusions, extracts, oils, and powders are drawn from simple weeds and herbs well known and much prized by our ancestors, but mostly now forgotten and despised. These can be found in almost every field and garden on the common and by the wayside. And as this little work is chiefly written for the poor, the greatest merit of my remedies lies in their very cheapness and vulgarity. Vulgar meaning common. It is for the sake of the poor that I have devoted long years to this study, seeking out and renewing acquaintances with each obscure and insignificant herb, with a view to raising it anew to a well-deserved honor and consideration. Vision was actually the kitchen pharmacy, the kitchen medicine. And, of that, he said, our household pharmacy should contain four principal partitions and several smaller side partitions. The four principal partitions consist of tinctures or extracts, teas or infusions, powders, and oils. Into the side partitions, properly stored and arranged, comes everything which cannot be classified in the foregoing four heads. So he's talking about bandages and splints and certain things. He talks about how to arrange it, how to put everything in a little bag or box. He says everything should be kept in a dry, cool, and easily accessible place. The contents of each bottle, bag, or box should be distinctly marked and labeled. Great order, method, and cleanliness are the principal conditions for organizing and keeping up this household pharmacy. Be presided over by the mother of the family, or else by her most tidy and industrious son or daughter. Well governed and administered, this little pharmacy will be a source of blessing and consolation for the whole household, and its faithful dispenser may joyfully remember the words of our blessed Savior, inasmuch as ye have done it unto the least of these my brethren, ye have done it unto me. That's a great vision, and that really continued on through Brother Aloysius. Johann Kunzel, he wrote about herbs around 1900, 1920. His work was incredibly popular before the Second World War, but apparently never got very far out of Germany because of the war. And then Maria Trevin comes up, 1970s, and she's reviving all this medicine. And her book, Health Through God's Pharmacy, is predominantly teas. Just about every single herb she lists in her books and how to use them are teas. For instance, agrimony, common word name, sicklewort, cocklebur, or church steeples. She describes it grows in sunny, dry places on hedge banks and sides of fields, woods, and paths. Looks similar to mullein, certain stages. Now, it's good for inflammation of the throat and mouth, tonsillitis, throat disorders, thrush or inflammation of the mucous membranes or mouth. It says that gargling with this tea clears the voice for singers and public speakers. The leaves are excellent for in wounds and are used successfully for rheumatism, lumbago, digestive troubles, hardening of the liver, and spleen disorders. Drink up to 2 cupfuls a day. Directions: infusion, that means the tea. 1 teaspoon of agrimony into 1/4 liter of boiling water. Allow to draw for a short while. That's a simple an explanation of making tea as I could possibly think. And I'll get into the specifics of the proper way to make an herb tea and a decoction, which is for his brother, in a minute. But let's think for a minute why an herbalist, a professional herbalist, would tend more toward tinctures. And really, it comes down to, I guess, three aspects. Well, first of all, herbs don't really store all that well. They begin to lose their potency, um, you know, within a few months after being picked and dried. I mean, some will last longer than others. Usually, your flowers have the shortest lifespan. Most herbalists say replace your whole stock of dried, cut and sifted herbs every year. But if you tincture them, you can preserve them. The medicinal properties of the herbs are extracted in an alcohol tincture. They're preserved. They're also concentrated. The alcohol pulls out all these medicinal constituents so that you don't have to use as large a bulk amount of the raw herb, so to speak. And that gives the herbalist the option of very precise dosages. Like if it was, say, an enemy, you might take 1 to 3 drops, and that's all. That's pretty hard to quantify in a tea, and that would be a pretty hard tea to take anyway. I'm not sure I'd want to take an enemy in a tea. It has a causticness to it. But if you were taking, say, echinacea, you might have 2 whole dropperfuls. That's going to be the equivalent, oh, I don't know, about a teaspoon or so. Now, echinacea could easily be taken in tea because you're taking larger quantities, but You can put a, 2, 3, 4 ounce bottle of echinacea tincture, and you're going to get so many doses out of that, and it's going to last so long, and you can be kind of precise, and you can, feel all scientific about things, which you know how important that is to me to feel all scientific about things. Um, well, so that's principally why herbalists do tend to prefer tinctures. But also, you have to remember that our ancestors really rarely had access to clean water. Who knows how long it was before they figured out they could filter or boil water? I mean, when the first pot was made that could actually hold water, probably the first thing that was cooked in it was a broth, not a tea. They probably were not thinking at all about purifying water, but I'm sure over time they realized that if they took meat and bones and maybe a few herbs or some vegetation or whatever and let it boil in that pot, they could have a nice, strong, nutritious meal that would warm them on a cold day, and it would keep a little longer than raw meat hanging around or a big, roast that was probably going to get dirty if it wasn't eaten very quickly, and could be brought back to the boil, so it would actually keep longer than that roast. And they also, I mean, all the old cookbooks always talk about skimming the scum off. The proteins as they cook out of the meat tend to bond with anything impure in the water. It floats to the top in sort of a scum, and you skim that off to get a clear broth. That probably predates teas, but I don't think it's any coincidence that in the ancient world, really the first teas that were popular are teas that have an antimicrobial, an antiseptic, or an anti what you would call vermifuge. That means it kills worms effect. And I think as our ancestors realized that they could kill the stuff that made them sick with these herbs, they probably connected the dots and thought, well, if we put those herbs in water, it may make the water safe to drink. That's probably where herb teas come from. And those first herbs that became popular, really in common use throughout the ancient world, were the artemisias, wormwood, mugwort, and southernwood. Following that, you see a huge popularity of the sages. Sage, arguably the most popular herb in the ancient world, well up through from the oldest records, well up through the ancient Greeks. Very antiseptic. Wormwood, of course, which I mentioned before, kills worms. Sage is great for a sore throat because it kills those bacteria, the germs in your throat. It also is astringent. Whether it kills them or not, it helps the feel of the throat. You would actually have to have a very strong tea to kill the germs, but it is going to help. So will yarrow. Yarrow is antiseptic. Chamomile has some antiseptic qualities. Mint is really interesting. Um, I think it's, yeah, Thomas J. Elpel, who wrote Botany in a Day, recommends chewing on some mint leaves before drinking what could be bad water for a creek because the volatile oils will help kill anything nasty in that water. Mint is very strong, and mint has always been, wherever it's grown, a popular herb used in tea. So are many of your culinary herbs. I mean, you can think about rosemary and thyme and basil and all those that have those strong volatile oils, which makes them so good for cooking in very concentrated amounts, make them a good medicinal tea. Usually these teas can be quite bitter because you have it so concentrated. And so you add a little honey to that, a little milk, make it nice. But that's probably sort of the where the tradition of herbal teas comes from, and who knows how far back it goes. But preserving herbs in wines and beers, and once distillation was discovered, was probably more common practice really all along the professional herbalist. But, the herbal teas were so popular for the home. We see in the Germanic traditions, we see tons of herbal teas. We also see it in the British herbal traditions. So, I mean, like, think about it, Rome, Greece, Egypt, the ancient world's a pretty darn hot place. And they probably didn't have a whole lot of use for teas that would warm them up. But in the cooler environments, the cooler climates of Central Europe, Eastern Europe, Western Europe, British Isles, it can get pretty darn cold, and a hot cup of tea can really do the trick. So we see a lot of the herbal tea traditions in England until England began to become an empire, and tea became tea imported from China. The Asian camellia plant. That set up this whole world trade system that eventually ended up in the British taking slaves from Africa, putting them on sugar plantations in the Caribbean, shipping sugar and molasses from the Caribbean up to New England, around the Boston area, turning it into rum going back to England to buy more tea, more slaves, and more sweets until eventually we have the whole tradition of high tea and Victorian England with their teeth rotting out. And so getting back to tea, I know I've wandered far afield. I think another little quote from Father Nape would be really fitting because this is, when you think about if we want to make herbs accessible to the common person, we need to get rid of any elitism. I mean, my only religious and moral duty, really, when it comes to my fellow human being, is to treat each one with respect. That means the rich as well as the poor, any skin color, any background or ethnicity. And that means people who go to Trump rallies have just as much a right to using herbal medicine as people who go to rainbow gatherings. And that's a big reason why I do this podcast. I think you figured that out by now. So, Father Nape says, in dry weather, when you're coming back from the fields or when going out to view the state of the crops, turn aside occasionally from your path to pluck here and there one of the healing herbs. Give the preference to those that grow in dry soil, best of all on sunny hillsides, and those flowers and berries which are most perfectly expanded and developed will bring you the best fruits in time of sickness. Many of the plants and herbs will be found growing in your own kitchen garden near the house or farm buildings. Teach your 10-year-old little girl or boy how to seek for the plants. This will give them pleasure and save your own time. The plants should every year be renewed. That is to say, new stock should be gathered in and the old thrown away. Each housewife knows how to prepare tea. For one cupful, she takes of the dried herbs and flowers, as much as she can grasp in 3 fingers, and pours over it boiling water. After straining, it will then be ready for use. Well, that's pretty simple, and that's a really nice vision of how I think, especially rural families and homeschooling families could really start this tradition and make it a family tradition and pass it on. And, again, my goal is not only to make herbal medicine approachable and acceptable once again to normal people, get people using the herbal and home remedies of their great grandparents or great great grandparents so that they don't have to go running to the doctor every time they get a sniffle or a sore throat or a sprain and end up with a useless antibiotic and have their wallet surgically removed. So think of this nice vision of kids wandering around a field and picking flowers. Sounds a lot nicer than sitting in a doctor's office, doesn't it? Well, that did get us into a little bit of how to make tea. And if you want to get fancy about it, call it an infusion. Everybody will think you're a big fancy herbalist if you do that. I really like, I've mentioned this before, Doc Jones. He has some great classes on the Grow Network, and he's always talking about how we shouldn't use terms like diaphoretic or anticatarrhal or all these old medical terms that really doctors don't even use anymore. It's jargon. He says jargon pushes people out. It makes this an exclusive club. We should use inclusive language so we can bring everyone in. That's why Doc Jones is a hero of mine. Well, all right, so how do you make tea? Well, everybody knows how to make tea, right? Well, it turns out most people don't, because herbal teas are a little different than, black tea or green tea. And, well, and that actually reminds me, remember I was telling how when the British switched over to tea, they kind of got rid of their herbal tea traditions. Well, here in America, the colonists really had a period where they couldn't get that tea, and they had to bring a lot of herbs back into their repertoire. They brought in things like Labrador tea. But one of the most interesting, and one I really encourage everyone to look for, is Yopon holly. Yopon holly is North America's only caffeine containing leaf tea. It grows more in warmer climates. It's actually a weed in places like Texas. People will pay to have it eradicated. There are so many people who have land in the South and the Midwest and, kind of scrubby land that really isn't even fit for cattle anymore that would grow Yopon holly like crazy. And this is an industry that could get us off of a lot of imports and a lot of teas that are really of questionable quality and may have been sprayed with a lot of, pesticides and preservatives. Yopon holly is something you should definitely look into if you can. But back to how to make tea. First of all, you can either make your tea in a teapot or in a cup. Now, I'm a single guy. I don't have need very often for a whole pot of tea. I usually do the cup method. Either way, bring your water just to a boil, then turn it off. You never want to boil herbs. You're not cooking your herbs, you're steeping your herbs. You're infusing this hot water. So if you're using a teapot, get a good handful of those herbs and put it in there, take it off the heat, cover it with a lid, let it steep 10, 15 minutes. When it's cool enough to drink, it's done. You can then pour it through a tea strainer into a cup and sip on it. But if you're going to let that cup sit there for any length of time, cover it. See, one of the main components of these herbs is the volatile oils. And if you don't cover that cup, they will just evaporate, they dissipate. So I usually just take a saucer and put it on top of my cup. They actually make like special cups for herbs that look like adult sippy cups. You could see me using one of those, can't you? Uh, the other way is if you make it for a cup. It's like Father Nape said. Get about a spoonful of the herbs in your fingers and put it down in the cup. Pour the just simmering water over it. Cover the cup once again. Let it sit until it's cooled enough to drink. Now, if you're fancy, you can put those herbs in a metal tea ball or a little muslin tea bag. That's fine. I'm not fancy. I actually usually just kind of suck the tea through my teeth and strain it through my teeth. So you can imagine that's not the most appealing look, but it works. And what things might you want to use in tea? Well, first of all, teas are made from the flowers and leaves of the herb. The cousin to tea is a decoction. A decoction is made from roots and bark. In that case, you do want to put those in a low boil, like a simmer, basically, and boil them for, even up to an hour until you really get everything extracted out of those woody parts of the plants. But for just a regular tea, all right, let's say you got a cold. All right. Like I said before, sage. Sage is great for a cough. It's great for a sore throat. It's astringent. It's antiseptic. Um, let's say you have a bad cold, maybe a flu, and you're feeling really rough and you're feeling fevered. Yarrow. Yarrow is also antiseptic. Yarrow taken hot as a hot tea will make you sweat and help you break a fever. It's really interesting, and this is one of the reasons you might want to think about tea is because, for instance, in yarrow, hot yarrow tea not only does what I just said, but it increases secretions. This isn't my forte, but from what I've read, it can help bring on a stuck menses. It has processes of just bringing things out, basically. Whereas cold yarrow tea is anti-inflammatory, stops helps stop bleeding, especially intestinal bleeding and such. It stop spasms in the intestines, like diarrhea. It can help with that. It shrinks the liver. So the same herb prepared either hot or cold has two entirely different properties. And I mean, you prepare the tea the same way, but you either drink it hot or cold. You really can't do that with a tincture. I mean, you might make a tea with a tincture if you just want to cook off some of the alcohol, if someone has a problem with alcohol, but you're never going to get rid of all of the alcohol. I mean, don't fool yourself into thinking that. So really, that's the only way to effectively get those two properties of yarrow. Um, Teas, because they don't have the alcohol, may be better for children as well. Um, let's say you have an upset stomach. Well, you can take fennel seeds and make a nice tea out of that. If you had, well, maybe you had diarrhea, you might want to look into some calendula. Um, and if you're a little restless and sleepless, maybe some chamomile. Chamomile is such a nice tea. It has this just wonderful scent when it's fresh that you're never going to get from a tincture. I mean, there's so many, any herb that you can take internally, you could probably use as a tea with just a few exceptions. And any good herb book is going to tell you whether you can use it for a tea or not. So I guess that's pretty much wrapping it up on teas. Like I said, decoctions are different. They are made from roots and barks. Um, if you're using something like echinacea, you can do it two ways because you could take the flowers and leaves and make a tea out of it. If you had good echinacea root, you could take the bark and make a decoction out of it and get all the benefits of the entire plant. Maybe you want to make the root into a tincture so you can keep it around. It's sometimes considered stronger, but just go ahead and take those flowers and make a nice tea out of it. I mean, why not? And, the teas also, I mean, some of them just really taste good and they really are pleasant and they really are relaxing. So I hope you got something out of this. And I want to see you on Rumble soon because we are going to be doing some really fun herb classes. And if you want to send me an email, southernappalachianherbs@gmail.com. Yes, that's one of the Google products I'm stuck with right now. If there is show notes or I can send you a notification when another class is coming out, do that. I'm not using a list server. I'm not trying to gather email addresses. I'm not selling email addresses. I'm not even going to use like MailChimp or something like that. I'm literally just going to send you an email. I mean, as long as it's not like 10,000 people, then maybe I have to look into something different. So anyway, I'm excited about this. Y'all have a great week, and I'll be talking to you again very soon. The information in this podcast is not intended to diagnose or treat any disease or condition. Nothing I say or write has been evaluated or approved by the FDA. I'm not a doctor. The U.S. government does not recognize the practice of herbal medicine, and there is no governing body regulating herbalists. Therefore, I'm really just a guy who studies herbs. I'm not offering any advice. I won't even claim that anything I write or say is accurate or true. I can tell you what herbs have been traditionally used for. I can tell you my own experience and if I believe an herb has helped me. I cannot nor would I tell you to do the same. If you use an herb anyone recommends, you are treating yourself. You take full responsibility for your health. Humans are individuals and no two are identical. What works for me may not work for you. You may have an allergy, a sensitivity, an underlying condition that no one else even shares and you don't even know about. Be careful with your health. By continuing to listen to my podcast or read my blog, you agree to be responsible for yourself, do your own research, make your own choices, and not to blame me for anything ever.